and I would rather them answer your question.
Do you think Rico Cortez could answer it?
Rico who?
Cortez.
Kidding.
No, I mean, he does a lot of the temple service type stuff.
He and Joe Good, that's their bread and butter. I mean, that's not the right term. That was a slip. I'm sorry. That I did not mean that the way it came out. So let your Puerto Rican blood settle down out there, Rico. That's their field of expertise. So yeah, Joe Good, he and Rico are working pretty closely on things like that. That might be a question you could ask him, and I'd be happy to defer to him on that. All right? Okay,
thanks for not getting mad because I mentioned him. But he just came to mind because he does a lot of the study and teaching on the temple.
No, I didn't get mad at you because you mentioned. I've known Rico longer than any of you in here have known Rico. I knew Rico before he was Rico. I knew Rico when he was Hernan. All right, I'm going to tell this story. All right, I told you the other night, okay? Back in 2000, I had done a presentation at Perry Stone's camp meeting, and it had to do with the high priest going in and going up to the altar of incense, and we did Hebrew songs and stuff and such as that, and I taught about the restoration of David's tabernacle. There was a pastor and his wife that they were there visiting from Florida. They were pastors of some fairly large church at the time, and so they invited me and Beth and some others to come down and do that same presentation and wanted me to teach on restoration of David's tabernacle. So it's a Sunday night, so we pull up into the parking lot of this huge church, and so all of these guys get out and meet us at the car. They got the black suits, they got the jet black hair slicked back, pulled back, and they got the little earpieces, and they got the sunglasses on, and they're talking into their lapels like this and all this kind of stuff, So this one guy comes up to me and he says, "Let me get your bag." I said, "Oh, that's okay." He's talking about my briefcase, And I don't know about you, but my life is in my briefcase, So he's like, "Look, let me take your bag." I said, "No, that's okay, I got it." "Oh, I'm here to serve you. Let me take your bag." I'm like, "It's okay, I got it. It's no problem at all." "I'm here to serve you. Let me take your bag." I'm like, "Look, pal, I'll take my own bag," That was Rico. That's how I met Rico Cortez, all right? So, he don't need to get all around me. All right, but no, he does study the temple a lot, and so he could probably answer that question a lot better than I. I'm sorry, I just don't want to tell you something that isn't so.
Well, I appreciate that if you don't know.
I don't know everything. I mean, shock and amazement, I don't know everything. I'm a student just like the rest of you. What I share what I've learned. And, and like I told you this morning, a lot of what I share is what the Father's dealing with me about, personally. But I go back to one of my favorite sayings: when you don't want a fly to get in your mouth, you keep it shut. So I don't want a fly to get in my mouth right now. All right. Who is look what you do this every time. All right, who was next? Donnie?
I'll just comment a little bit about the question about the sacrifices. When I come across in the scriptures a passage I can't understand, I always go to the Father and ask Him to show me. And He's always showed me and enlightened me in the way I can understand it. So, anyway, my question is, you kind of mentioned this morning, we are not meant to kind of sit still. The light must go where the darkness
sometimes they have to do that.
So can you elaborate on that and what it might look like today?
Well, we'll elaborate on the concept first, or the precept, maybe that would even be the better word. In Matthew chapter 11, when John is in prison and he sends the emissaries to Yeshua, "Are you the one, or should we look for another?" And he said, "Go tell John the things that you see and hear. The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the lepers are cleansed, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And he goes on and said, what did you people go out in the wilderness to see? This, that. But if you went looking for a prophet, you found him. And then he talked about how from the days of John the Baptist until now, to quote King James, it says, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. All right. Many years ago, a gentleman by the name of David Bibbin, who he worked with Flusser and some of these other scholars in Jerusalem, they took the Greek text of the New Testament and they translated it back into Hebrew. So when they took that particular verse in Matthew chapter 11, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, the violent take it by force. When they took those Greek terms and translated it back into Hebrew, what they found was that the wording in Hebrew connects to a prophecy that's in Micah chapter 2. Let's just go over there and read it. All right, Micah 2, verse 12. I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of you. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Botzrah. And there's some translations that render that a little differently. But I will put them together as the sheep of Botzrah, as the flock in the midst of their fold. They shall make a great noise by reason of the multitude of men. And so the picture that's being painted for us here is that one day, and this is understood to be a messianic prophecy, as it were, one day he is going to gather his people. Let's pause there. In Ezekiel 20, he talks about how he would go out on a dark and gloomy day looking for his lost sheep or his scattered sheep, that he himself would do it, and that he would gather those sheep that had been scattered. So if you take that prophecy and then you connect it to this idea, when he is gathering them, what is he going to do with them? This prophecy says that he's going to put them together as the sheep of Botzrah. He's going to put them in a sheepfold. He's going to gather them up. So, literally, when these shepherds would take their sheep out for pasture, if they had to, stay overnight in an area where there might be predators and things like this, anything that would steal a lamb, he would build this sheepfold. And it's my understanding that they would kind of fence them in, and then the shepherd would actually become the gate. He would stay there in the gate so nothing can pass out or pass in without him knowing about it. John chapter 10, Yeshua alludes to that. So in this prophecy, it's saying that he's going to gather those sheep that had been scattered. He's going to put them in a fold. And then it says this. Well, they make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. And then in verse 13, it says the breaker. And that term in Hebrew. And Jonathan, I'm going to go to the drawing board, okay? There you go. In Hebrew, this is the phrase. It's poretz. The definite article would be there, the haporetz, or the breaker. But this is the word that's translated violent in Matthew chapter 11. The kingdom of heaven suffereth violence. Because that Greek term is describing something that has an energy to it. It's a lot of times from Greek it'll be translated in English as snatch, but the idea behind the word is it's a force that moves very quickly and there's energy behind it, all right? In Hebrew, it's paratz is the root term. Here, it's the breaker, haporetz. He's going to come up before the sheep that are gathered in this fold, and then they have broken up and passed through the gate. So what happened was the breaker comes, and he makes a place where they can break out of this sheepfold. And there's this energy and this force behind it. And as it's breaking out, they pass through the gate. They are gone out by it. And then the prophecy goes on and says, and their king shall pass before them, and the Lord on the head of them. So that's why it's a messianic prophecy. It's about restoring the kingdom and all these things. But the breaker and they have broken up, those two terms in Hebrew is where in Matthew 11, it says, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. What it's really saying was, or what he was really saying was, that For 400 years before John came on the scene, there had been 4 centuries of silence. Nothing. No direct word from God through the prophets. When Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi died, it is said that Israel entered into a time of silence for 400 years. Then all of a sudden you've got this guy by the name of John, who, by the way, is the son of Aaron, who by all rights should be in the temple, but he's out in the wilderness. And what is he saying? Repent. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. And all these people are coming to his baptism to see what's going on and what's this all about. They're asking him, are you Elijah? Are you the Messiah? Are you that prophet that should come? No. Who are you? I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Make the crooked path straight. Prepare the way of the Lord, the king who's going to pass at the head of them, according to Micah 2. So what Yeshua was doing was alluding to the fact that John, when he came on the scene, was the breaker. And he was starting to acknowledge that something's getting ready to happen, and people are going to his baptism, and things are beginning to break loose. They're beginning to hear from God again. And then the Messiah comes on the scene, and things really break open. Are you with me so far? So the idea that the kingdom of heaven is to be moving is tied to the idea that the kingdom of heaven advances. It's breaking out. We're an army. In Exodus chapter 12, twice it talks about when Israel comes out of Egypt. There's 2 verses there. They were referred to as an army. So what does an army do? Well, it fights. How does it fight? Why does it fight? To take ground away from the adversary. How do you take ground away from the adversary? You advance. You move. You don't sit idly. Sometimes you may get pinned down, but you have to break out, and there's this energy and this force behind it. So all of these things coupled together, and there's other things that we could bring into the discussion, I guess. But all these things, you put them together, it becomes very clear the kingdom of heaven is not designed to sit and be stagnant. It's not to be idle. It's to be moving. It's to be advancing. Many years ago, Brad, Scott, and I were on some conference. And there was this fella that had been sickly, had been taking this particular supplement, and it really changed his life. And basically what it was, and I don't understand the science of it, but basically it energized the blood cells till they were, they're more active, is my understanding. And I'm boiling this way down. I'm dumbing this down a lot. And, Brad was sharing that with me, and what he was talking about, or what he was trying to demonstrate, was that even, in our bodies, those blood cells, when they're moving, we're less susceptible to disease. When we're moving, we're less susceptible to disease. So we were designed to move, not just sit on a couch and watch football. Because what happens when you do that? You stuff your face with pizza, you get fat, and you die of diabetes. Right? We're designed to move. That's because the kingdom of heaven is designed to move. So, did I elaborate enough? Maybe too much? All right. But anyway, there's lots of other things that, kind of go along with this. But that would be my short answer to the question. Who is next? Yes, sir.
Okay, just a sidebar comment. Talking about being still and being stagnant, because it brings to mind to me that sometimes people think of congregational life as being still and stagnant.
They ought to join us every now and then, shouldn't they?
They do not understand. It's constantly going forward. But him mentioning that, but I was also going back to Candace's question about offerings. And I don't know, sometimes I try to oversimplify things, and thankfully Nayla's not in here. So, but, we have something we do.
I'm not going to tell her you said that.
We have an opportunity here on a regular basis to bring our offerings. And I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. Temple service included things like bringing offerings that were actually then turned around to be the sustenance, the food for the priests who worked in the temple. So whenever there is another temple raised up, there probably will be some offerings. They may not be, like you said, people always think of the sin offering, but that's not everything that was done. And I'm not promoting Buddhism, but within Buddhism, if you find a Buddhist temple, quote unquote temple, the house where the monks are here in the States, if you ever go by there and visit, the entire community will be made up of Buddhists. And every day, 3 times a day, they make a trip to that house to feed those monks, because that's part of what they're supposed to do. They don't feed themselves. That's their offerings. It's just really interesting. I won't get into it here, but I learned that from a devout high church Lutheran pastor who got out of the chaplaincy and became a Buddhist monk, because he didn't have to do anything as a Buddhist monk, and they paid for everything.
Okay. Well, let's go back. I want to go back to 2 things you said. Number 1, he's not promoting Buddhism. Make sure we got that in there. Number 2, in the millennium, there will, there's going to be that activity, and there will be people this is my understanding anyway, during the millennial reign of the Messiah, there will still be people who are not in glorified bodies, who still have to be taught and instructed in the things that are clean and unclean, what's holy and what's not. The king will be there, but that doesn't mean the activity ceases. We're not just going to be lounging around on the grass playing harps and singing Kumbaya. We're going to be doing stuff. We're going to be, active. That when he created just the fact that the Bible describes a God who created everything and he set things in motion. And I'm not a proponent of evolution by any stretch. But if, and I say if, the whole idea of the universe is supposedly expanding, moving, if that is true, then that tells us right there that that is in the nature of the Creator, that things are supposed to move. They're not supposed to sit still. In fact, what does Peter describe? That when all the elements melt with a fervent heat, it's because this thing is folded up and imploded upon itself. So, and again, I want to make certain that nobody heard something that I didn't say. I'm not promoting evolution and, all the things that go along with that, including a Big Bang theory and all that. I'm just saying that if it's true that the universe is expanding, to me that would make sense. Just because his kingdom is one that is supposed to be expanding, what's supposed to be on the move. In this particular case, what we're supposed to be expanding and advancing against is the powers of darkness. So, back to your point. It has to be moving. Every part is important. And when it's doing its part, then it's running the way it's supposed to run. This thought came to mind. We, many years ago, Beth and I met some folks that lived in California. And this gentleman, he and his father had a business where they would refurbish a certain class of Rolls-Royce automobiles from the 19-teens, the 20s, early 30s. That's all they did. They would go all over the country. They would go overseas, and they would find these, dilapidated, rusted out Rolls Royces, and then they would find a part here, find a part there, and then they would restore these things back to, pristine condition. All right, so here's where I'm going with that, because he showed me a picture once where they had gone, I think this was in England. They had gone and they had found a body, the entire body of this particular line of Rolls Royce, that had been sitting out in a field so long that the sediments had settled over the decades, had buried this thing until you just see just a little bit of it above the surface of the ground. So they had to literally go in and dig that out. All right, my point. What is an automobile designed to do? To move. So what happens when you take a brand new automobile, you go park it out in a field and let it sit. What happens to it? It falls apart, right? Why? Because it's not doing what it's designed to do. It has to keep moving. And so I'm thinking of the body. What's happened to the body over the last several centuries at least, right? And particularly in the West over the last several decades. What's happened to the body? We've sat around and we've gotten fat. That's my assessment anyway. You may disagree with that, but that's my assessment. We've sat around, we've gotten fat, which, by the way, that describes Eli the high priest, who was the high priest in the days of Samuel, when he had the two sons by the name of Hophni and Pinchas, who were described as being sons of Belial, and they did not know the Lord. That's how they're described. So when we're not doing what we're designed to do and we're just kind of sitting around, we're falling apart. That's why there needs to be a revival. That's why there needs to be a restoration. That's why it's called the restoration of all things, to get us moving again. All right, so for all of you online, Mr. Jokester over here, Steve, no, said that's why we make you stand up and sit down, stand up and sit down. All right, but it works. So, all right, who was next? Dana?
Well, that's a beautiful intro to what I was going to share, because this morning I was being selfish. I just confess, like I was at home and there's some things that are of concern, and I thought, I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to spend time with the Lord, and I'll watch online. And Brandon and Melody got up and started doing worship, and one of the verses, I actually wrote it down from Blessed Be Your Name. It says, "Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering. Blessed be your name." And I was convicted by that, but I still sat there comfy in my house. And then, Bill, when you, and I shared this, William and I shared this personally with Bill, but I just felt led to share it publicly, because I'm thinking about the people on the live stream that would do anything to be in this room. And I'm thinking about how we lived in Texas where there was nowhere we could go. And we moved to Cleveland so that we could be a part of a fellowship. And then God gives us this amazing fellowship. And I'm like, I think I'll just stay home today. And when you shared what you shared this morning, when you said I'm in this place and I'm struggling, I felt so convicted. Because the body has to be together. Like he has given us each other these relationships, and I saw how I was taking it for granted. So I got dressed and got here as quick as I could, but and I did not even get a ticket on the way. But but I'm just grateful, and I'm so grateful that Bill and Beth, you both are so humble and real and vulnerable. And I'm not saying that I know you don't like but I want you to know that it is such a gift to each person in this fellowship, because y'all are real and genuine. And I'm just incredibly grateful. That's it.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, remember that you said that when I make you mad, okay? I'm messing with you. I'm playing. But no, thank you. Beth and I are always encouraged. You guys always encourage us, and we really appreciate it. And we are blessed by this fellowship, not because we're the facilitators of what's going on here, because it really wouldn't be all that fun if it was just me and her. So what this fellowship is, you know what I mean. You better know what I mean. No, I'm just saying that, what this fellowship is does not reduce down to who and what Bill and Beth are. This fellowship is got a lot of moving parts. You, your family, and everybody in this room, everybody that was here earlier, we're all part of it. We all have a part to play. And when we're all doing what we're supposed to be doing, this thing is going to run. We're going to move, and we're going to do what we're supposed to do. So let me also just say we appreciate you guys, and we appreciate all of the folks who are joining us online, who do that week after week after week after week, and who pray for us, and who want to be involved with this, and who support this congregation financially. People from literally all over the world who feel part of this. So y'all make that happen. let me rephrase that. The one who dwells inside of you, working in and through you and us, he's the one who makes that happen. So let's give all glory and honor to whom it is due. Amen? Amen. All right, who was next?
This kind of goes back to Wednesday night, if I may.
You may. What
This
did we
whole
talk
deal-
about Wednesday? No, never mind.
This whole deal between Satan and Eve seems to be convoluted. Adam was made in the likeness of God,
Okay.
and Eve was drawn out of him. A couple things. It seemed like Satan didn't have to work very hard to get Eve to succumb to his temptation, or whatever you want to call it. But then when you look at verse 6, she makes some astounding statements. And as I looked at this, I thought, this is a very quick assessment and a very quick conclusion, but a complicated conclusion. I mean, to me, she had to give this some thought, or she already had given some thought.
That's what I think.
And so, was this the only time that she was contemplated this thing, or did she contemplate it before? And then it goes back, is if Adam was perfect in the likeness of God, where did this potential for rebellion come from?
Okay. Were you finished? Going back to Eve, now, it doesn't say this in the text. Okay, so everybody understand that. We're just kind of reading between the lines here. Is it possible that this is the first time she's just really paid attention to this tree? The serpent happens to be there. They strike up a conversation, and as you said, very quickly she makes this assessment. Somebody help me out. Where is the verse that it's? I want to say it's in 1 John somewhere, where he talks about how, before we end up committing the sin, our eyes are led astray and we're seduced, and then we, fall asleep. My mind just went blank when I was trying to. Pardon? Yeah. I was trying to think where that was at. Say again? It might be that, but he's talking about how, and I'm just going to paraphrase it because I can't remember where it's at right now. We don't just jump into sin necessarily. A lot of times before we end up in the sin, it's a process that started when our eyes were, off of what it's supposed to be focused on, and we get it onto other things. Gosh, I wish I could remember. All right, read it. Well, I got pass the microphone, let her read it real quick, and then we'll come back, okay?
Oh, I gotta look it up real quick. Oh, sorry. Okay. Then after sin has conceived, well, it's actually, I think it starts in 14. Hold on. 14. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. And then 15 is, then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death.
Okay, that's the verse I was referring to. So what that says to me is we don't typically just jump into a sinful situation. There's a process to it. There's, our eyes go to something, we stay on it, we linger on it, things start working, inside of us. And if the opportunity presents itself, then we find ourselves indulging ourselves in that particular sin. So the text does not say that where Eve is concerned. But I am kind of like you. I thought, she has this conversation. And by the way, the man is with her. He's not off. It says he's with her. So they are in close proximity to this tree. This serpent strikes up this conversation, and to put it in your words, didn't take long for her to be led astray by this, which leads me to think that this is something that she's pondered before. This is something that she's, meditated on before. She's thought about it before. Maybe it's in that process that she concludes we're not supposed to eat of it. We're not even supposed to touch it. I don't know. But I do believe that there is merit to the thought that she has pondered this before. This is not something brand new. And I would include the man in this to some degree because he's with her. He's not interfering with the conversation that she's having. I just have to assume he's kind of listening to the conversation as it's unfolding. I don't know. But it seems that they've already been drawn to this. They've already considered this. They've already pondered about this. And then that conversation awakens something to the point that she concludes that it's good for food, it's pleasant to the eye, and it's a tree desirable to make one wise. So the adversary, I do not believe the adversary is all powerful. I do not believe the adversary has the power over you and me to make us do anything. What was the guy, Flip Wilson? The devil made me do it. No, he didn't. He didn't. Now, he may have put something in your path that he knew would appeal to you. He may have, you understand what I don't think he's everywhere speaking to everybody, but he might have put those thoughts, or whispered in your ear because he knows you're having those thoughts to make it seem justifiable. But the devil didn't make us do anything because he doesn't have that kind of power over us. Not those of us who have been born again. And in this particular case, before the sin, I don't think he has that kind of power over the woman or over the man. He's just really good at what he does. He's the father of lies. He makes something that is evil look good and appeals to those things that maybe we've already demonstrated to him that we're interested in that. We can't be 100% certain that's the way it went, but it makes sense to me that this wasn't the first time that this has popped into her mind. So, did I come anywhere near in addressing your question?
Yes. Adam was a pretty smart dude, right? I mean, God commissioned him to name the animals.
Right.
So he had intelligence, and he was made in the likeness of God. You made the statement that he knew the consequences for this disobedience. Did you not make that statement?
Well, God told him, so he would have to know.
So he didn't come into this particular scenario unknowing. He knew the consequences. And you made the statement he didn't put up any fight, which leads back to your statement that this was probably something they had maybe even talked about. I mean, we don't know.
Right.
For sure.
We don't know. We'll never know, at least in this side of the kingdom.
But it helps me, hopefully everybody else, understand that there is a process.
Yeah, there is. I'll be adamant about that. And I'm speaking from the point of view that, we're believers and, we're not going to be led astray. Most times we're not going to be led astray by sex, drugs, and rock and roll, those things that are obviously and blatantly wicked. That's not how he's going to try to seduce us, typically. It's going to be much more subtle than that, and it's always going to have this appearance of being good. But I'm adamant that it is not typical for people just to be walking in righteousness one day and jump into sin the next. I don't think that's typical. There's a process, and we get our eyes on things. We start pondering these things. We start thinking about these things. That's in part why Paul tells us that we need to take these thoughts captive. We don't need to linger on these things too long, because once you start thinking a certain way, you'll end up acting a certain way. Anyway, so I agree. I think that there is a process here. Who else? Yes, sir.
Was thinking about for today's message that when we were talking about Joseph being thrown into the pit and all the different things that he had to go to in order to become what our Father wanted him to be when it was time for him to be that in order to preserve Israel, that we have all probably had things happen to us at different periods of time to test us, to put us in situations to prepare us if this is that time for whatever's could possibly be coming, or training our own children to be ready for those things, to put us in trials that sometimes we don't even think we have the strength or the endurance to handle them. But then without that experience, we really don't have. If he just put Joseph in that spot like that and didn't have the experiences he did, he may not have done what he needed to do. And I look back on my own life, and I look at things where I was growing up and thinking I was this rough and tough, whatever, athlete, and then I went in the service, and then they pushed me even further, and then I went into specialty stuff in the service, and they pushed me even further, things that I never thought that I could do. But then I was like, oh, I've made it through that. And then I look at my own children, and I go, my kids will say, but I've been up for 18 hours straight. And I'm looking at them and go, you have no idea what you're capable of. You could go 3 days and probably still be doing just as good, but you just really don't know. And I remember going out running with my kids, in my later 30s, and thinking, I'm running with these guys, and they're 15, 16 years old, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to push them a little harder. And they're breaking down, not because that I was that much better. They were probably in better shape than I was, but I had experience. And I was able to push a little harder. And because I had it here, even though I was dogging out, I didn't let them see it. And that wore them out, because they were not experienced and didn't think about, just stay focused on the run. Don't look at him. Don't look left, right. Just stay focused. And they would have wore me out if they didn't know, if they'd had the experience. And that's what I try to teach my kids is, you could beat me, but you are doubting yourself because you don't have the experience. And I think it's the same way that our Father looks at us, is like, I need to have you have these experiences so that when the time comes, you're not worried about looking left or looking right. You're looking at me, and you're trusting that I am telling you, you can do this. You just need to believe in yourself, knowing that I'm the one guiding you in this. So that just really encouraged me, and I appreciated what Candace was saying about I did what she was saying. I know that when we came down here, it wasn't to come down here; it was to be with another fellowship, and I wouldn't not have probably headed this direction if we had not come down here. And you and I have talked, and I'm really thankful that Abba allows us to have these experiences so that we can learn from them. Learn not necessarily everything, the bad things, but the other things, the good things that our Father is saying, no, you may have been looking at this the wrong way. You need to pay attention more to what he's, that's the way I see it, is I need to be paying more attention to what he is telling me and where the fruit is, his fruit. And just focusing on that instead of the things that I have perceived in my own brain of how I think they need to be. So I did what Candace says, and I appreciate y'all.
Well, I appreciate that, Nate. Appreciate your family and appreciate your input and your observations. It's always very insightful, gets me to thinking. So going back to your military analogy and the experience factor, Robert, this will be addressed to you too, and probably many others in the room that served in the military. Would I be right in thinking that it would be foolhardy to take somebody off the street, take a green recruit, and put him in one of those special units that you served in? I know the answer to the question. It would be funny, but it could also be dangerous, is what I would think. Yeah, it could be very dangerous to them and to everybody around them, because I can only imagine that if you're in a fighting unit, you want people, that have experience, that have been under fire, so to speak, and that they've proven that they're not going to melt away when things like that happen. And so, going back to your point, if we are living in the days that we think we're living in, if things are beginning to come to a culmination, then it doesn't seem logical that a good general is going to put a green recruit in some of these very, very critical positions. He's going to put those that have been tested and tried, those that have kept, they may have fallen, they may have stumbled, they may have gotten exasperated, they may have even failed at some point. But they wounded, but they got back up and they kept going because they had trust and confidence in their leadership. And of course, we're talking about him, not anybody here, but him. So it only makes sense that we're going to go through those situations and have those experiences to call to mind, that when we're in that next test, that no, he's brought me through this, he's brought me through that, he can bring me through this as well. I never served in the military, but this is the closest I can come to that kind of an analogy, and that's when we first moved out on the property. We did things, and I will spare you the gory details, but we did things, and we got by, and we lived, and it's something I hope I never have to do again. But I have the experience now, and I know that if push come to shove, there are things that we could do. We learned how to do certain things, and we could do that. And personally, I believe that that's something the Father put us through as a family, for whatever reason, to learn certain things through that, to trust that before, it's not the same thing as serving in the military. Wouldn't equate what we went through to that at all. But the whole idea of experience, having experience with difficulties and trials and tribulations, there is a benefit in it if we keep our eyes where they're supposed to be. Amen. Who was next? Yes, William.
So this is going to kind of tie in with something Dennis said, and I was also reminded of something in the situation with Joseph. In James chapter 4 and verse 7, it says, "Submit yourselves then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." I have to quote that scripture to myself many times, and I think temptation has come from the very beginning of time, and it's been around, and James has dealt a lot with the heart, at the temptations, side of things, about watching your tongue and just trying to get to the root of the heart of things.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking about how Reuben, along with all of his brothers, was there with the same temptation to kill him because of the jealousy, but he said, no, let's don't kill him. He stopped it at that stage, and of course, God's plan still came forth, but, at least he stopped that initial, temptation.
Where Reuben's concerned, here's what I think. This is what I think. Reuben had lost, maybe that's not the best word, but for all practical purposes, he had lost that status as a firstborn because it says he defiled his father's bed. All right? So is Reuben one of those people like, hey guys, I learned a hard lesson here. I don't want to mess this up again. So no, we don't need to do anything to this guy. We don't, that's what that's what comes across to me, is that he's somebody that maybe he's learned his lesson by now. We don't need to do this. In fact, he had intent to come back and pull him up out of that pit so that he could be restored back to his father. And you have to think, this is the guy that took his place, more or less, as the firstborn. So, Reuben, in my eyes anyway, to some degree, he kind of redeems himself in that. Now, later on, as Jacob's preparing to die, he's going to say of Reuben, you know what? You're like water. You're running everywhere. You're taking the path of least resistance. That's, seems to be the nature there, because later on, some of his descendants are going to join with Korah, and they're going to lead a rebellion. So apparently Reuben's the kind of guy that, one day he's doing something really bad. The next day he's doing something that's, has redemptive qualities. But then his father says, you're like water, Anyway, for whatever it's worth. But I guess that would speak to the idea that temptation's been around a long time, and we can never let our guard down when it comes to that kind of thing. And resisting doesn't mean he doesn't come back. We need to keep that in mind. You know, resisting, he may flee, but it may be just that he flees for a season, because he's going to come back. So anyway, I'm rambling now. Yes, sir. Who's next?
I got two comments and I guess a question about Wednesday night. Been wrestling or thinking about it a lot.
This past Wednesday night?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Not
Okay.
this Wednesday, but past.
No.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. The comment is it seems strange to me that the coat of many colors is taken from him, and then the coat that he leaves, I mean, it's kind of curious to me that there's coat involved in two instances.
Coats are always getting him in trouble.
That's right. But you also commented today about that the Father doesn't do anything except he reveals it first to his prophets. I think that he still is very much in the business of doing that, but I think the prophets of today are waiting for the time for those things to be delivered, possibly, and they're not really actively prophesying or telling. And I think it's the right timing is what the Father's wanting to come about then.
Okay. Is that a comment or a question?
That's the comment.
Okay.
The question is, or the thing I've been pondering a lot this week is, the Father clothed Adam and Eve, made clothing from hides, okay? It seems to me that there had to be a, let's say, priest to perform those atonements. And I kept wrestling with, isn't that, or is a possibility of that being the first encounter of Melchizedek? Because he was, from the beginning, there was no birth and all. And is that the first appearance of the Messiah performing the priestly duty?
Okay, you weren't here last week, were you?
Yeah.
Were you?
No, I was online.
You were online? Okay, because we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
As far as Melchizedek,
Yeah.
I guess that's going to really depend on who you think Melchizedek was. You know? I'm just going to leave that there. You know, it depends on who you think Melchizedek is. But as it relates to the Messiah, I'm very strongly of the opinion that because he made them coats of skin, an animal had to die. That infers blood, and blood is necessary for the remission. You know, he's covering their shame. I'm of the opinion in whatever the form was, I don't know, but as far as the function, the Creator steps in and acts as priest, so to speak. And he acts as high priest. Now, whether that's in, Melchizedek, and if you think Melchizedek is synonymous with the Messiah, or the Messiah in some form that we can't comprehend or understand, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the form of it, but the mechanics of it, the function of it, it seems to me that the Creator steps in and he functions in the role of the priest. Because the olah offering, the burnt offering, was the offering that everything was placed upon the altar, everything was consumed on the altar except for the skins, except for the hides. And those were reserved for the priest. So if the Creator in some way steps in and functions in the role of the priest in this particular regard, then those skins are reserved from him. Then what does he do? Then he turns around and he clothes their nakedness. He covers their shame. And that I see as being the function of our heavenly high priest because he makes intercession for us. What is he? He is advocating for us, right? And he was exposed and he bore shame so that he could cover ours. So that's the function that we see in the beginning in this act, that whoever is acting in the role of the priest is covering their shame. Well, that is what our heavenly high priest, being our advocate, is doing, is he not? That's what he did through the atonement, to cover our sins, that shame that goes along with that. That's how I see it. The form of it, I don't know. The function of it, I'm convinced the Creator is functioning in the role of the priest. Okay? That's the best I can do. All right, anyone else? While we're thinking about that, I'm going to try to read this one up on the screen. This is from online. It says, why did Potiphar's wife tell the men of her house that Joseph wanted to lay with her, but didn't include the same account of Joseph? Okay, somebody's going to have to help me out here. Dale, can you see that any better than I? Because the lines are running together. Can you read that out loud?
It says, why did Potiphar's wife tell the men of her house that Joseph wanted to lay with her, but didn't include the same account of Joseph wanting to lay with her to Potiphar? Was there something that she knew about her husband behind the scenes that we don't know about? And did Yahweh hold back her tongue in not including that part?
Okay, so is the person asking why didn't she say anything to Potiphar? Is that what the essence of the question is? Because Potiphar found out.
Sounds like she's saying that she related the one story to the men, and didn't tell everything to Potiphar.
All right, well, let's go back and read it. So let me see if I can understand what's being asked, because I'm still, frankly, not clear. But let's go read it real quick. That would be, thank you. I'm going to start earlier than that. Verse 7, it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wanteth not what is with me in the house, and he's committed all that he has to my hand. There's none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but you. You are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day, he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. There was none of the men of the house there within, and she called him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, fled, and got out. And it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled, that she called unto the men of her house and spoken to them, saying, see, he has brought in this Hebrew to mock us. He came to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came, that would be Potiphar. And she spoke unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which you have brought unto us came in to me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spoke unto her. No. All right, so reading that, I guess I'm missing something here. It doesn't seem that there's anything significantly different about what she told the men and what she told Potiphar. She's holding the coat. This guy come in to mock us. So I'm not seeing that there's anything significantly different there. The bottom line is she made the point or made the accusation that he made a pass at the very least, and Potiphar threw him in prison. I've always had this question: why didn't Potiphar have him killed? That's kind of wondering. You know, his wife is making this accusation. That's his wife, but he knows Joseph. So why didn't he just have this guy killed? Why does he put him in prison instead? I think that there's something there, you know, that might need to be, you know, investigated and considered. But anyway, I'm sorry whoever asked that question. If I did not address what you were asking, it's just because I don't understand exactly what you're asking. So I apologize. Anyone else here? All right. Do you have any online there, Miss Beth or Robert? Anybody? Okay. All right. Oh, over here.
I guess it's more a comment than a question, but there was an interesting thing that kind of jumped out at me this morning. When I went to read about Judah's journey, and we got past the point where it was Judah's idea to sell him. So Judah has the idea to sell him, and then they present it to his father. They present the coat to his father, and then it just says right after that Judah takes off and leaves his brothers. Like he left. And I think that he was kind of dealing internally with his own decision of what, I think that he had a certain amount of guilt, but he figured running away from it would help. And then he goes on this journey where he, meets Shua and has the boys, and he goes through the whole story of his sons. And it kind of struck me for the first time that his sons didn't honor each other as brothers. Like the second one chose not to honor his older brother's memory. And that kind of struck me because in a way that's kind of dishonoring your brother as well. So there's obviously wasn't that close brother relationship there either. And I wonder what kind of struggles Judah was experiencing within his own home as well, that maybe his boys weren't getting along the way that they were supposed to either. And, you go through the rest of that journey that he goes through. And then at the end of it, by this point, he's got to be pretty worn out by the time she brings the coat to him and he goes, he's at that stage of the game. But when she presents that coat to him, and I know that in that moment, I think the wording is even some of this very similar. But in the moment when she presents the coat to him and says, recognize this coat, whose is it? Mm-hmm. I know, I say I know, I don't know. I really feel impressed that he probably had
a flashback?
A big flashback, yeah. Recognize this coat, and I think that kind of, and then he has the twin boys out of it, and he names one of them Perez because he broke out.
Broke out, right.
Yes. And then the next thing we know, Judah's going back, at some point in time after that, Judah had to go back to his father's house. So I just, Judah's whole journey this morning just kind of struck me as, all of this friction takes place with him and his brothers, and then he goes and starts his own family, and watching that, that same dishonor, that same disrespect take place among his own boys, and then seeing the coat, he was probably like, I got to go back to where this was to make this right. So.
Which then is going to play a significant role in his change of heart years down the road, and him, being willing to put himself on the line in the stead of Benjamin.
Yeah, take me. Let the boy go home.
Right.
I'll stay.
Right.
Yeah.
So, talking about a process, there's that process how we fall into sin. Sometimes, there is a process to restoration too.
Right.
It doesn't happen overnight. It is a process, and there are certain steps that have to be taken. So, I think that's fascinating. I hadn't thought too much about, the friction between the boys as much, but then the coat, hey, whose is this? It's like, that's got to ring a bell.
That instantly. And I think the wording is even very, very similar in there. I've heard a teaching at one point in time where the wording, when she presents the coat and where they're presenting the coat to him, it's not a, hey, we found this coat, do you know whose it is? They knew whose it was, and they knew that their dad was going to know whose it was.
Yeah.
And when she presented the coat, she knew whose it was, and she knew that he was going to know that. So it wasn't so much of a, hey, do you recognize this? It was, hey, you need to recognize you gave him this coat, and now he's not here anymore.
Yeah.
So it was, it was very, I don't want to say spiteful, but it was also kind of a, hey, this kid that you put in charge of everything, he ain't here anymore. When they presented it to his dad, it was almost kind of cold the way they did it.
Yeah, and if you read, the way I read the text, it seems that, Jacob's not really sure they're, being real honest with him because he knows about the friction that's going on here.
Yeah.
But back to Judah, I think that's really important, as I said, because it gives you a little bit of insight into the fact that reading between the lines, this guy's probably going through, the mental anguish of, realizing what I've done, and then he gets reminders of it, and then he has to live with reminders of it every day. So later on, I think that would have played a role in bringing Judah to the place of, I'll be in the stead of Benjamin, you know. If I won't let anything happen to him, I'll be surety for him. And then when it comes right down to it, you know, now we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I think Joseph was pretty smart a fellow. But remember, he was full of the Spirit of God. And for him to say to plan that out the way he planned it out about bringing me your other brother and, you know, putting the coins in there or not the coin, but the cup in the money bag. Was he just that lucky?
I think he wanted to see the change of heart.
I know he wanted to see the change of heart.
Testing. He was like, is it really different with Benjamin, or is he going through the same stuff I
right.
went through?
But to devise that plan that he did, to bring it to the point he did, that Judah says, let me be enslaved instead of him. That I don't think it's just a man's smart.
Right,
I think that is guidance. You know, that is the creator of all things by his Spirit is leading those people that are players in this, those that are, you know, willing to submit to his hand. He's orchestrating all of this. But he also knows what's presumably anyway been going on in Judah for all these many years to bring him to that place, because restoration is a process too. But it's just like on the flip side of it, you know, our hearts are led astray, the sin is conceived, and then boom, we're in it, and you know, life can be falling apart just like that. Okay, but on the flip side of that, we can go years and years and years and years, and this is happening, and maybe progress here, and then all of a sudden you're in a room with the guy that's now you realize is your brother, and in an instant, all these things that your heart has been pondering all these years, and on both sides of the issue, in an instant, that restoration can occur. And all those years can just melt away, and he restores the years of the locust. Very good observation and point to make, because God hasn't abandoned the other principle in this story, Judah. And so think of that in prophetic terms. God has not abandoned Judah because he rejected the one that was sent to him. You know? He leads him and allows him to go through things and situations and trials and tribulations for centuries. But he knows what's going on in the heart. And he realizes, you know, he's orchestrating a situation where Judah one day is going to realize some things, and in an instant, there's going to be a reconciliation and a restoration. He'll look upon them who they have pierced, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Look, if anyone else has a question, let Dale know. I'm going to read this one. Could the long tunic of Joseph, his father gave him, be a type of priestly garment, making him the priest of the family? In the sense that he was going to be the ruler of the family, the leader of the family, then yes, I would agree with that. I wouldn't say that, you know, the priesthood was bestowed upon him necessarily, but that he's going to function in the role of the ruler of that family in matters that are spiritual, you know, the protector of the covenant. Yeah, I'd say it was a type, to use your terminology there. And does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to this conversation? Well, you aren't very talkative today. So if we have any other questions online, I'll take those. If not, we can, that's it online? All right. One more? Okay. Well, you don't have to. You don't have to feel pressure to do it.
I know.
So.
I was going to say this earlier, but then being we went ahead, I will say this, that God gave Joseph some discernment, because immediately when he first saw his brothers, he didn't say, aha, I told you so. he waited.
Well, I think what she said is right. He wanted to see if there had been a change of heart.
Right.
And again, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit and getting into the next Torah portion. But
God had changed Joseph's heart too, to make
he
him
did.
be more patient.
He did.
And discerning.
It wasn't just a one-way thing. It wasn't just on them to make, you know, to be different. Joseph had changed. Joseph had matured. Yeah. Joseph had come to realize, I need to be discreet. Whereas before, I don't think he was. He just kind of blurted it out, right? And I hope you all picked up on what I was getting at with that this morning. I hope everybody got it. You know, when Beth and I lived in Florida, and I told you about how we started getting into these things, and I was sharing with everybody, and I was just amazed that nobody was jumping on board, and it really created some distress, you know. But I learned through that you know, you got to know who to talk to, when to talk to, how to talk to them, you know. And so I'm hoping, if we're going to put ourselves in the role of Joseph, at least for this, I'm hoping that we're learning, that we're becoming wiser, that we're becoming more discreet, and not to compromise, and not to declare and live the truth, but to understand that people are in different places, and sometimes people just don't have ears to hear. I mean, the Word made flesh walked the earth, and he spoke these truths. How many people actually got it? You know? So we have to be discerning. And so, yes, Joseph's heart was changing too. And the Father orchestrates a situation where when Joseph sees that his brother Judah loves their father just as much as he does, and he's willing to sacrifice himself, that's what it can, you know, that's when he knows he's not the same man. And that's when he reveals himself, and there's this great reconciliation. So anyway, anyone else?
Not really a question, but just an appreciation of the fact that you take the time to qualify some of the things you say as what they don't mean, and not to take them a certain way. We did have somebody online that was with the question you were struggling with, pointed out that he believes that's coming out of the Quran because the Quran promotes that position.
Oh.
And someone else took that as his promoting of the Quran. So just to be clear, before we jump to assumptions, he also clarified, I do not support the Quran. I'm saying that is where that position comes from, and this is where it's dangerous to read other people's doctrine until you're really footed in what you believe.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I have a copy of the Quran. You know, I have a copy of the Book of Mormon. But that doesn't mean I believe what's written in it. It's just I've read what they believe. Why? Because I want to be able to communicate with people, you know, and know where they're coming from. Not that I endorse or condone, you know, their belief system. I just want to, what is it you believe? So yeah, just because someone refers to that, we shouldn't just assume that they're endorsing that. Yeah, right. No, we're not trying to indoctrinate ourselves in all these other things, but I want to know what the adversary's up to. That's kind of the way I look at it. And what do they call that in military terms? Intel, reconnaissance. You know, you want to. I mean, if you're going to be an army and your intention is to advance your army against that one and take ground away from him, then you need to know everything you can know about your enemy. You need to know how many boots they have on the ground. You know, where are they positioned? You need to all these different things. Why? So you plan your attack accordingly. Would that be a fair assessment here? So that's why I look into things like that, and why I was, I'll be familiar, not intimately, but familiar with things that are written in these other works, just because I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know their position, because I believe that I'm going to have a biblical response to that faulty position, if I know what it is. All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, it's me again.
We've batted around.
I know, it's going around in a circle here. And I've been debating on whether to say anything about this, and about Joseph had a dream, and you made the comment that he had the dream twice, so everyone knew it was from God. Well, I had a couple of dreams, and I'd like to share them.
Okay.
And I think they pertain to today. Back in the 70s, the late 70s, when I was in Frankfurt, Germany. I had a dream that these people, men, maybe even women, they were dressed in, I call them hazmat suits, like you would wear if there was a nuclear, you know. And they came in and they had guns, and they were coming into the PX. Well, the PX is really an American-owned thing. And so I just remember that dream. And then a couple of years ago, I had another dream. And gunfire was going off. I mean, and I just got up, I like leaped and rolled into, like dunked into a ditch. And this is on American property. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because last night, I got something in the email that was rather disturbing about the election thing. And these people believe that the reason that Pelosi is not giving over the impeachment things.
Articles of impeachment.
Right. Is because they are forming a coup, and somehow once they had the people in America convinced that Trump is a real crook, they're going to go after Pence over the same kind of thing. And in the process, then they're going to arrest Trump and Pence. And that would put Nancy Pelosi in as president because she's
That's not a dream, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, that is. And if she comes in, they said then she would bring in Hillary Clinton as a president and step down.
And it gets worse still.
Yeah. And so, okay, I got that last night. And then this morning from this lady who's of our faith, and she was writing about some stuff too, about civil war breaking out in Virginia over these gun controls, that the governor there is wanting to set up roadblocks in some counties in Virginia to take people's guns away. And what in effect is going to happen is that it's going to cause the country to break out in civil war. And so I'm thinking these dreams that came from God, I believe I wasn't because I was eating pizza, but I believe they came from God, and God was...
What did you have the night before?
I don't remember, because that was back in the 70s and 2 years ago.
Okay.
But
all right.
I'm thinking that there is, and I've heard prophecies about that we were going to be hit by nuclear by different countries like Nicaragua and Venezuela, and I can't remember all, but they're going to come on the east and the west coast, and they're going to hit us with nuclear. And now we have this chance of civil war breaking out over what's going on with this thing with Trump. And so I'm thinking maybe God was just kind of using those dreams to warn me what's happening, what's going to happen in our near future. So I just wanted to share those. And
All right, well, I'm going to respond to that.
okay.
Okay? Luke 21:24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, and so this is my response to what you're sharing. I'm not saying that these things aren't going to happen, but here is our response to the things as they are beginning to happen. When these things begin to come to pass, then look up, not down. Look up, lift up your heads. Don't let your heads hang down. Lift up your heads. Why? Because your redemption is at hand. So these things that, you know, I do the program and we talk about some of this kind of stuff and the politics of it and all. And I have a political opinion, you know. I have a very strong political opinion. I have a view of how things are going right now. I mean, I'm not, I don't think that everything that Donald Trump does and says is, you know, like God did it or said it. I don't believe that at all. I think he's just like us. He's a man. He's a man with faults and warts and flaws. And, you know, he's like Reuben. You know, one day he's doing something really good. The next day he's doing something pretty not so
Tacky.
good. You know,
Tacky.
I mean, sometimes he says things or tweets things, you know, and I want to stick a fork in my eye. You know, I mean, it's just like, you know, sometimes he's his own worst enemy when it comes to that, you know. Sometimes if he just zip it and just coast, everybody else would just kind of, you know, they just kind of give themselves enough rope to be hung. But do what? It's part of the process, right? But at the same time, you know, some of the things that he has done, I'm much in favor of, starting with recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and recognizing the Golan as part of Israel, and being, I believe, very, very aggressive in his defense of people like you and me, and our not having, we can go and worship and not think the IRS is going to jump on us and this, that, and the other. We didn't have that to some degree in the previous administration. And so the enemy of my enemy has become my friend, as it were. But that doesn't mean I believe everything he does. On the other hand, some other people you named, I mean, there I just see evil, you know, and just evil intent, all right? The bottom line is this, as far as all those things, you know, America, like every other nation on earth, including Israel, has a lot to answer for. Right? Okay? Every country, every nation on earth has lots to answer for. How the Father allows that to be addressed, I won't pretend to know. It may come like something you were talking about. But on the other hand, if you were going to pin me to the mat, I would say, based on principles that we find in the Bible, like the wheat in the tare, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the midst of the garden, usually it doesn't come from without. It usually comes from within. And that's what I see happening, more so than the external thing. You know, I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm just saying the greatest threat, as far as I'm concerned, is right in the middle of us, all right? And that's why we're seeing some of these things. So talking about those things, looking about those things, pondering those things, if we get too focused on that, it can be overwhelming to the point of being depressing. So which is why I have to go back and I have to read this and I remind myself of what he said. These things are going to happen. It's just going to happen. But when you see these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your head, because our redemption is at hand. The suffering has to precede the glory. The labor has to precede the birth of the child. And if the restoration and the redemption is the child being born, and that's what Paul likens it to, by the way, in Romans chapter 8, the birth pangs have to come first. So, said all that to say this. In Hebrews 12, it says that we are looking unto the author and the finisher of our faith. It is time that we be ready to lay aside the sin that so easily besets us and every weight, and that we look unto the author and the finisher of our faith, Yeshua the Messiah. Let me read the rest of that to you, and then we'll just kind of probably bring things to a conclusion with this, because this seems to be appropriate. I'm reading in Hebrews 12. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight. And a lot of these things that are going on, if we allow them, they become weights. They weigh us down. You know, they can be overwhelming. They can become depressing. Okay, agreed? Mm-hmm. So we're admonished to lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily besets us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Yeshua, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradictions of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. In other words, look at what he did. Look at what he put up with. Look at what he endured because of the joy that was set before him. And if we keep that in mind, then we don't become wearied in all of the things that are revolving around our lives, and that we don't faint, he said, in your minds. Because he goes on and he says, you have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. For all the things that we've gone in, 99% of us have not to contend with things to the point that we have shed blood over it. And he was making the point that that's what the Messiah did. So we have to keep our focus on him. So, I don't know how this country is going to answer for its sins. I just know that it will. Okay? In the meantime, I'm going to pray for my nation. I'm going to pray for our leaders. I'm going to pray for our president. Here's what I'm praying for my president, that he will humble himself before the Almighty. That God does not allow anything to touch any of us unless some way, somehow, if we submit to his will, it is for our benefit. It is in our best interest. And so all this other stuff that's going on, the Father has allowed that to touch his life. Not that I think that those people are just on the other side, but he's allowing this to touch his life. And so I'm praying that he will humble himself and he will seek the face of God. And if he does that, if he can do that, then those who used to come against Israel, when God would raise up somebody to be a chastening rod against Israel, he would let that happen to bring correction to his people. But then those people on the other side that were unjust and uncivil and who were oppressive, you know what he would do? He'd turn right around and deal with them. So that's, in practical terms, that's how I am addressing this, that I'm praying for the president that he will humble himself before the Almighty and that he will genuinely seek his face. And that if he were to do that, then I'm going to believe that true justice is going to prevail. Because here's what I want to happen. And I'm getting long-winded in this. I'm sorry. Here's what I want to happen. I want the truth to come out, whatever it is. And wherever the chips fall, that's where they need to land, you know? And just let it be what it's going to be. Because if there is hope for this nation to be restored, if that's the Father's plan, then the only way that's going to happen is there be a true, repentant heart collectively, that we are acknowledging our sin, that we're acknowledging our transgression, how we've offended him, and we address it. We seek forgiveness. And then and only then can this nation be restored, if that's the Father's plan.
Bill, I wasn't even thinking, when I was thinking of all this stuff, what I was thinking of is, am I ready to meet the Savior? Am I repented? Have I repented of everything that I should repent of? Am I walking that line, that plumb line that God has, that we should walk? Is my heart right? Am I there? Was my, and my family, and I've been, I've got family that I'm concerned about. And so that's what, if this is going to happen, if a coup is going to happen in our country, there's nothing I can do to stop it if this is God's will for this to happen. My thing is, I need to be ready that we could be facing death, and I need to be ready.
Well, that's where repentance starts, with you and me and each and every one of us individually. We can't expect that there's going to be any kind of corporate repentance if there's not independent and individual repentance. So yeah, what I said does not dispute what you just said.
No, not at all, not in the least.
That's where we're at, though, as a people. So when you have a repentant heart, I have a repentant heart. If if we can, as a people, if that come to that place, then maybe there's hope, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to hush. You've heard me talk about how I'm just intrigued with George Patton. Have you ever heard me share that before? Okay. From my childhood, I've just always been intrigued by George Patton. By the way, if you ever saw the movie, George C. Scott talks like this. The real Patton talked like this. No joke. But I have often thought about how similar, in some ways, Patton and Trump are. Brazen, arrogant, brash, profane, vulgar. And Patton was a guy that believed beyond any doubt that God had put him on this earth to do something. And he lived, he ate, he breathed being a soldier and being a commander and being a warrior. Because he was convinced that was his purpose for existence. And frankly, given the evidence, I don't doubt it. I mean, God does put warriors in this world, all right? That's not to condone or endorse his personal habits and choices. It's just to say that's the kind of a person he was, and he was convinced that the Almighty had put him on this earth to be a warrior, and so he dedicated himself to being a warrior. Now, say what you will about the president. He's vulgar, he's brash, he's profane, he's arrogant. Modesty is not his strong suit. All right? But he's a fighter. Say what you want to. He's taken a lot of guff. I'm a Ronald Reagan man. Ronald Reagan didn't move the embassy to Jerusalem. So there's some things about him that I admire in that he is a fighter. That does not endorse his life choices and the other. All right, but going back to Patton, he was convinced the Almighty put him on this earth for a reason. I'm convinced that Trump is there for a reason. Now, we can debate about what it is, but I'm convinced he's there for a reason. All right, so if the Almighty can get somebody who's as vulgar and profane and arrogant as a George S. Patton Jr. or a Donald J. Trump to do his will, why does he have such a hard time with his own people complying and doing his will? It's almost like he's saying, I'll tell you what, you won't listen to me. I'll get somebody that's the very opposite of what you think one of my people is supposed to be. I'll get them to do what I want. I'll use them almost as a provocation to us. Now, you can take that for what it's worth. But that's one of the things that I see going on here. So, yes.
Oh, okay.
You,
I know who
yes,
you're pointing
you.
to.
Yeah,
Okay.
the lady with the darker hair, yes,
Yeah,
you.
okay. Sorry. I'll give you my name later and my phone number.
That might be
And my
helpful. See,
number,
we
yeah.
have 4 children together, okay?
Okay. I wanted to speak up for our streamers here. One, they have been saying that we should be praying for our president because of the current shenanigans that are going on and attacking him, that, he puts up a strong front. I agree. What's it like when he lays his head down at night, when these things are swarming around, all these accusations and things, the mockery they're making of our Constitution, our government. So we do need to pray for him. The other thing they're saying is let's remember to pray for everyone around the country who's going to be starting the Hanukkah celebrations in light of some of the recent awful events. They're concerned about different, delis in their communities that get out and light a menorah every night during Hanukkah, beefing up security because of anti-Semitic threats that are coming in some areas. And then I like what Bonnie had to say in the midst of all of this that we were talking about when you and Candace were talking here. She said, this country is not our home. Our home is in the land, the promised land. In Egypt, Israel was made uncomfortable, so they would leave. Why not us, believers, here now? So
I agree, which is why I said your redemption is at hand, and if that's the Father's will, as it relates to this nation. because we have to, as his people, have to come to this realization, if we haven't already, is that the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Messiah. And there was not an exemption there. It was the kingdoms of this world, and that includes this one. It's sooner or later, this kingdom comes to an end. You know, John had to decrease so that Yeshua could increase. Likewise, the nations of this world will have to decrease so that Jerusalem will be made a praise in all the earth. So I agree. And I agree that we need to pray for the Father's favor and protection. Nate, did you have something you wanted to add?
Just
Yes.
that when,
Hold on just a moment, Gene. Hold on. We'll get the mic to you in just a moment, okay? Hold on.
just that when you were talking about Patton and Trump, they believe in what they believe in, and they're going to push. And what Candace was talking about, if it's our time, I've been in a couple of situations where I thought it was my time, and I just put my head down and said, well, if it's my time to go, I'm ready to go, Abba. And nothing happened, thankfully.
And we're glad.
It was just the trial was there, I think, was just to see how I would respond. And I was at complete peace, trusting that I believe that when it's time, he knows I'm at a place where it's time for me to come home, and that he's going to raise me up again whenever he's ready for that. So if we can get to a place where we really, and that's a question I always ask myself, do you believe in what you believe in? And so when it comes that time, if Abba decides that it's time, you need to believe that, Abba, I know I'm ready to come home, and that when it's time, you'll raise me up again. So, and then you have peace and all that, and you don't even worry about it anymore.
Well, and that there is how they overcame the adversary. The blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives even unto death, which is just rephrasing what you said. All right, Miss Jean, the mic's coming to you. Everybody wanted to hear what you had to say.
Well, exactly what was said before, you said it. God will allow what his plan is, regardless of what the people. Now, this week, if you read Psalm 35, right on spot for what's going on with our president today and our leaders. We need to pray for all our leaders.
Let me turn to Psalm 35.
Psalm 35.
Okay.
Prayer does change things.
Yes, it does. I'm going to read it, okay?
Yeah.
Psalm 35. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for my help. Draw out also the spear and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am your salvation. Let them be confounded and put to shame that seek after my soul. Let them be turned back and brought to confusion that devise my hurt. Let them be as chaff before the wind. Let the angel of the Lord chase them. Let their way be dark and slippery. Let the angel of the Lord persecute them. For without cause they have hid from me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my soul. Let destruction come upon them at unawares, and let his net that he has hid catch himself. Into that very destruction let him fall. And my soul shall be joyful in the Lord. It shall rejoice in his salvation. All my bones shall say, Lord, who is like unto thee, which delivers the poor from him that is too strong for him, yes, the poor and the needy from him that spoils him. False witnesses rose up, and they laid to my charge things that I didn't know. They rewarded me evil for good to the spoiling of my soul. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returned unto my own bosom. I behaved myself as though he had been my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one that mourns for his mother. But in my adversity they rejoiced and gathered themselves together. Yea, the abjects gathered themselves together against me, and I knew it not. They did tear me and ceased not. With hypocritical mockers and feasts, they gnashed upon me with their teeth. Lord, how long will you look on? Rescue my soul from their destructions, my darling from the lions. I will give you thanks in the great congregation. I will praise you much among people. Let not them that are my enemies wrongfully rejoice over me, and neither let them wink with the eye that hate me without cause. For they speak not peace, but they devise deceitful matters against them that are quiet in the land. Yes, they opened their mouth wide against me and said, Aha, our eye has seen it. And this you have seen, O Lord. So don't keep silent. Lord, do not be far from me. Stir up yourself and awake to my judgment, even to my cause, my God and my Lord. Judge me, O Lord, my God, according to your righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me. Let them not say in their hearts, Ah, so would we have it. Let them not say, we have swallowed him up. Let them be ashamed and brought to confusion together that rejoice at my hurt, and let them be clothed with shame and dishonor that magnify themselves against me. Let them shout for joy and be glad that favor my righteous cause, and yea, let them say continually, let the Lord be magnified, which has pleasure in the prosperity of his servant. And my tongue shall speak of your righteousness and of your praise all the day long. So that's a prayer, I believe, that the Father will defend those that are acting righteously, and he will address those that are acting unrighteously. And I agree with that. Did you have your hand up, sir? Okay. We'll give the microphone to you, and we'll let you. You're going to lead us out here.
You had brought up General Patton.
Yes, sir.
And I wanted to relate a little kind of a semi-personal tribute, I guess. My dad had two brothers. All three of them served in World War II. His youngest brother had lost his life on the Anzio beachhead in March of '44. And so my dad's next youngest brother, who was just younger than him, was in the 101st Airborne, and he had jumped at D-Day and gotten injured. He had jumped again during Operation Market Garden during the end of September and had once again gotten injured. And he was sent back to England and rehabilitated. And then he was able to, through some personal sacrifice of his own, be readmitted to the Airborne. And he ended up rejoining his company about, I think, about the 13th or 14th of December, and they just happened to be in a little crossroads town in Belgium named Bastogne. And I guess what I wanted to say was, of course, the mission that General Patton was given, and since the Germans had turned around, not having been able to reach the Meuse River, and through everything that they still had, with like 6 divisions against Bastogne, I'm thankful that I got to meet my uncle, because without George Patton, I would not have known him. And so.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's, one person can make a difference. And if we had the tenacity and the commitment, there's no telling what the Father can do in our lives and through our lives if we're just have that kind of will to keep going, to have those experiences, and to know that I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me. But it takes action on our part. We have to do things. Sometimes we just have to have courage. On that particular, campaign, Patton pushed his men day after day after day so that they could get to Bastogne, so that they could relieve those men that were surrounded there. And so there's a lot of heroes in that particular situation. We'll never know their name. But I also like to relate, if you don't know the story, that on the way to Bastogne, they were held up by weather. And Patton went into the chaplain and said, I need a prayer. And I need you to print this prayer out for all the members of the Third Army. And I want every member of the Third Army praying this prayer that the Almighty will give us fair weather so we can get up there and relieve these men at Bastogne. And the truth of the history is that chaplain printed out this prayer. All the members of the Third Army were praying one prayer that God would give them fair weather so that they could go and relieve Bastogne. And the foul weather moved out, the fair weather moved in. And anyway, I could go. You messed me up now. We could get into a lot of stuff here, but it's getting late. We got kids back here. But let me just say this. It's been a good day. I don't know about you. It's been a good day for me. It's been a day that that has just reminded me the value of perseverance. So I would like us to pray as we dismiss. And for all of you who are joining us online, thank you so much. Lloyd, come here, brother. Where's the microphone? Oh, I want you to dismiss us in prayer, brother, okay? I want to thank the Father for all he's done for us today. Let's all stand together.
Father, we just want to bless you for everything that's gone on here today. All the answers all the questions that have been answered, prayers that are being answered to us. And Lord, we just bless you for everything you do. We bless you for Jacob's tent and for Bill and Beth and everybody behind the scenes. And Lord, we just want to bless you for another good day. And we just ask you to bring us back at the appointed time and take everybody home safe. And Lord, we love you. And bless you in your Son's holy and precious name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Hanurli Shavua Tov, everyone.